Mental health issues can affect your insurance cover, but Investec Life says assessments used by insurers are outdated and need to be revised. It's now partnered with a global reinsurer to develop new standards. It'll be piloting the new toolkits in March. It includes an enhanced questionnaire to better understand support structures when evaluating risk indicators. For more on this, we're joined by Snenhlanhla Sithoma from Investec Life. A very good morning to you, Snenhlanhla. Thank you so much for your time. How outdated exactly are, insurance covers when it comes to mental health? Because mental health is not an issue that we've been dealing with just like from last year.
Good morning. Well, we're talking about a very old age industry when you talk about life insurance. Most of the products were designed in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And we know how the mental health has been changing over time, but also more so coming out of COVID, we're seeing more or acceleration in terms of the trends of mental health. And I think what for me is quite fundamental in our industry of life insurance is how we assess mental health when people are applying for life insurance, but also the benefits that we offer within the product, I think for me are secondary, but really how do we make sure there is sufficient cover that people can get if they do have a mental health condition.
Why is there so much red tape, though? Because this is not the first time, insurance covers come with so much red tape. I remember with HIV and AIDS, you had to jump through so many hoops. You had to do so much just for you to be able to get covered, if you were even going to get covered, because, you would be in a position where you would have to go for an HIV test. And if you did come out HIV positive, you couldn't get that cover. But of course, since then, fortunately, covers have jumped onto the bandwagon, come with the times, and have ensured that people do get covered. But now we're dealing with mental health. It is now also dealing with so much red tape, so many hoops that you have to jump through. Why is that the case?
I think for me, there are two elements to it. One is the much more difficult one when it comes to mental health. That mental health is not like other physical impairments that you typically see that we as insurers typically deal with. So for example, if you've have had a cancer or a heart condition of some sort, or you've got diabetes, those have got very, very easy and clear assessment tools, if I may say, or some tests, or blood tests, or some scans, or anything that you can actually do. While mental health is much more dynamic, it's much more of a spectrum, and it can be a bit subjective, of course, with some scientific backing at the back of that. But typically, it will be your therapist or your doctor who will do an assessment of some sort to determine your diagnosis. And that diagnosis can actually change over time. So because of that dynamic nature of mental health, it becomes very, very difficult actually at underwriting stage when you're taking up life insurance to truly understand what is the risk that the insurer is taking on a person who's got a mental health condition. And that, for me, I think has been the biggest challenge for the industry and also for the clients who really want to take out cover. And I believe that fundamentally needs to change. The other part for me, which links to your earlier question about a point about HIV, is really about the stigma around mental health, which we found earlier on in the early 90s and 80s about when it came to HIV. There's still a lot of stigma that surrounds that. That does have quite a big impact in terms of people seeking help and seeking treatment when it comes to mental health at the moment, similarly to how it was with HIV in the earlier days. So that really fundamentally shifts the risk that the insurers are able to take and are willing to take. And I think for me, addressing both of them is what our industry is trying to battle with. And I think the tools that I think we bring to the market at the moment are trying to solve one of the two.
Talk to us about those tools in Snenhlanhla. Just what do they entail? What exactly are they? And how are you looking to pilot them and roll them out?
Yeah. Again, before I just go into a tool, one of the challenges we've got in how we assess mental health is that we use the model that is called a biopsychosocial model. It's basically look at your biology and your biological aspect and your psychological factors. So biological aspects will be your gender, your age, anything that has to do with your health, your physical health, and your being. While the psychological element looks at your psyche, your mental wellness, and how you're responding and how you're dealing with your mental health. We bring in a third element to this model. It's called now the biopsychosocial. So it's bringing the social element to say what are the support structures you've got in place. Because, for example, we know if you've got, for insurer at least, one of the worries about mental health is will it lead to a suicide, as an example. But if you truly understand the social structures and the social support that this person has, you are able to better assess the risk, and it results in a much fairer way of assessing the risk for the client, but also a much more accurate way of assessing it for the insurer. So we bring that to the market, and we believe it's going to be a fundamental shift in how we expand the access to life insurance for people who have got mental health conditions. And again, when you talk about mental health condition, you're not talking about only the major things like schizophrenia, bipolars, and major depression. We're also talking about stress. We're also talking about anxiety and other lower end of the spectrum. And we believe that this model will be much fairer in how it assesses those conditions for people.
The stigma around mental health, would you attribute it to perhaps there's just not enough education around it? You know, I mean, you will get your parents who are of a different kind of thinking, a different kind of school of thought, a different kind of background, you know, a different kind of exposure, that they themselves are dealing with mental health issues that they just don't know about because of the education or lack thereof that they are dealing with. So now you've got a parent that doesn't necessarily know how to move around you as somebody who knows that they're dealing with mental health issues. Could it be a case of education that maybe even our insurance companies themselves, because insurance companies are not robots, you know, they are run by actual human beings who themselves come from certain backgrounds, so they too may need an education so as to roll out a pilot of the nature that Investec Life is doing? Would you say that there needs to be a little more education in the insurance companies about something like mental health so as to minimize the stigma?
Yes, and without a doubt, and also I think what we found, it's something we're passionate about at Investec Life, but what we found is that it's actually quite complex in analyzing and looking at the factors that drive the stigma, because there are lots of, I mean, at the top level, it is educational and awareness or lack thereof that you find across the industry, across society when it comes to mental health. But underlying that, it's a lot of factors that are overlying and crossing over each other. If you think about the cultural elements, you think about the gender dynamics, you think about the level of education, formal education and informal education, if you think about just the normal social issues that we find in South Africa, I won't go into the details. I mean, there's just so many fundamental ones. And it does place us as South Africa in a very unique situation compared to other countries. Other countries do see also an uptick in mental health, but ours is driven by unique factors. Even though the results may be the same in the end that you're seeing the increase that we're seeing globally, but what drives that is quite different. I'll just take one example, the gender dynamic. We do see, especially in the life insurance space, a lot of men tend to present themselves with or tend to be diagnosed with mental health at a much later stage compared to females, and they tend to present themselves when they're much more severe, and they do tend to have a high rate of suicide compared to women. And that, for me, is really driven largely by the gender dynamics, the stigma, and then men are supposed to be stronger, men don't cry. So you look at that gender dynamic within the society, within the education system, within the employment system, the corporates, the factories, and the rest of the dynamics that you find in the South African context are really taking the odds against mental health wellness.
Most definitely. Sinenhlanhla, we'll leave it there with you for this morning. Thank you so much for joining us here on the South African Morning. That is Sinenhlanhla Sithomo, who is from Investec Life.